Hey, everybody. Welcome to What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Amy.
And this is Margaret. And today we're talking about messiness.
Messiness. And
Physical messiness, not emotional messiness. We'll talk about that some other day.
I'm very interested in talking about, I am a default neat person. I would argue
Correct.
you perhaps less so. And I think
Not
that-
perhaps.
right. And I think,
not less so. I am a complete disastrous mess.
and Gretchen Rubin talks about outer order, inner calm, which
Yes.
I think is true. And I think it's true for me. But there's also a lot of stress that comes with creating outer order. And maybe that's not the same true for everybody. So that's that. I'm looking forward to discussing this with you.
These are the many things we will be getting into, Amy. But first, mailbag. This is from a user on our Facebook group who says, I got to see Amy and Margaret tonight at City Winery and introduce my sister to my favorite podcast. I got to tell Amy and Margaret that they helped me through significant postpartum anxiety with my first son by making me laugh and always getting to solutions. Quote, if something feels hard, it's because it is, unquote, will always stick with me. If you haven't seen them live, totally worth it. Thank you, Amy and Margaret, for what you do. It matters.
This was amazing. We got to meet this person the other night and her sister after our live show in New York. This quote, if something feels hard, it's because it is. I started talking about my book a little bit. So I'm going to give a little shout out to my book, Happy to Help. Comes out in January, available for pre-order. Margaret was gracious enough to let me do a shout out from the stage. So this is from the book. And getting to meet this person after the show and talk about how laughing helped her during some tough times was just so gratifying for both of us.
Our next live show is February 6th in Philadelphia, and we're looking forward to putting a couple more dates on the calendar.
Yeah.
If you have somewhere you'd like us to come, especially if you have a mom community who you think you can help turn out for the event, we would love to hear from you on our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/What Fresh Hellcast. Amy, let's talk about mess. So mess, first of all, is a spectrum, right? From
your mess may vary, right?
Yeah. Shiplap, all white Instagram perfection with a chalkboard that says fresh muffins for all.
We know this person. We
You
both
know,
that person.
a kind of dangerous, unsafe environment that involves, hoarding, animals living in the house.
We're walking
something
it
that's genuinely unsanitary.
We're walking it in from the unhealthy ends of the spectrum, right? From the like no more wire hangers end of everything must be perfect all the time, and this isn't safe for my kids to live in. We don't need to talk about those ends, or do we?
I think we don't need to talk about this is physically unsafe, that is an area that is outside of our expertise in mental health and public health. But I don't think we're walking in from the Instagram perfect end, because I do think that still plays in to some of what is going on when people think about keeping a clean space.
It occurs to me when you said Instagram perfection, right? Instagram perfection. When I do a picture of a room in my house is going to be on Instagram or anything, of course you like clear the mess. I mean, literal like laundry basket of everything you don't want in the shot is behind my phone camera, right? I'm not an influencer, but I do this. You can clear the shot. That's one kind of perfection. And then of course you see that in this house, we give hugs perfection,
right?
On Instagram that was created for a photograph. And you think that that's what all of your house should look like all the time, or that's what all of her house looks like all the time, which I guarantee you is not the case.
No, and I also think there's a step way beyond that, which is you on a Tuesday being like, oh, I'd like to take a picture, but my son left his socks on the couch. Let me take those out before I take a picture. And the many, many people who are curating Instagram brands around my white farmhouse that has a hand-hung chalk sign that's like whites, darks in their laundry room, and all of the pods are in a clear glass container with a ribbon tied around it. And that has become an industry and something that people create content around. And Casey Davis, who is an Atlas podcaster, her podcast is called Struggle Care. She also wrote a New York Times bestseller called How to Keep House While Drowning. She says, and I really like the way she phrases that that's a hobby. Like, making your house look like that is a hobby.
That's right.
That's a job in and of itself.
And
It's a
it's
choice that is beyond whether or not you are a messy or clean person. In the same way that, like, you don't choose to knit or you don't choose to crochet, you don't choose to chalkboard your whole laundry room into whites and darks and fabric softener.
yes, but I'm saying something a little bit different, which is that even the person who knits and shows beautiful things, she doesn't knit 24 hours a day, right?
Right.
And even the person who makes a hobby of her beautiful home, her house probably doesn't really look like that 24 hours a day. If it does, that's all she does, and that's another issue. But we're drawing out. We think if you widen the frame, the rest of their lives and their
Looks like
homes are
that.
going to look like that, and I'm a bad person because mine doesn't. When their hobby is to highly curate the sun coming through the window at just the right angle, their lives don't look like that either.
I think that's right, and I think even more so that when we see someone say, like, "I knit this sweater for my baby," I might think, "That's an adorable sweater. I don't knit. Kinda wish I did, but I'm moving on." That's a different experience than sometimes seeing the Instagram perfect home where everything is neat and orderly, and somehow that story becomes, "I'm a terrible person because I don't live like this," and you don't see it. That's why I like the phrase, "That's a hobby." Like, I don't knit, and also I don't live in this perfect household. I think it's important to take a breath when you see that and remember that distinction.
There's been more people like Casey Davis, more content creators that have been very popular for showing us something that's more real. And I
Yes.
don't think it's more quote unquote real. I think it is more real, right?
Yeah.
Like here's my house. I'm going to clean it and I'm going to talk about why this is hard. This is my sink full of dirty dishes. And so I do think there's more of that on social media than there was 5 or 10 years ago,
Absolutely.
and it's
I think
probably
it's
very
a
helpful.
pendulum swing, I think,
Mhm.
right? That, like, as people start to curate this is the farm that I live on with my 7 kids, and somehow I'm in this immaculate dress all day, picking wildflowers with 3 babies on my hips, and this is what it's like to live on a farm. That a natural response to that is like, also, here's what it's like to live on a farm. It's
Right.
really
There's also
dirty and
manure on a
messy
farm.
and poop.
Right.
Yeah, like, it's mostly the poop, you
Right,
know?
right, right.
And there's a difference. We understand intellectually there's a difference between the way people present themselves online and the reality of that, but I do think it's still worthwhile to actually take a minute and really highlight that, because sometimes your mind still tricks you into being. I went on a holiday house tour. It was a fundraiser for a local school, and like 4 people opened their houses and they had it beautifully decorated for the holidays. And they were these beautiful, nice, rich people's houses and beautifully decorated. Everywhere you looked just was some beautiful, whimsical, amazing decoration. And I came home and I just felt so depressed for like 2 days. I was like, I live in a hovel of doom and darkness. And it's hard not to compare yourself to other people, but that's not real life, a holiday tour that is a fundraiser.
Right, right. There's some point at which that outer order inner calm becomes outer order inner stress that I need to like
Correct.
that glass needs to be needs to be washed and put away immediately because it can't be in the sink because then my kitchen doesn't look perfect. That that doesn't sound like calm to me. And then there's another thing that we'll probably get to, which is the kids. I was never sure how much I was supposed to be. My kids were little. They're not gonna put the playroom back the way I think it should be put back, right? And like,
Right.
I'm tired of picking up after these kids. And so sometimes I thought that kids played more. The kids could play for longer periods in a more organized and inviting playroom than in a just like, Barbie heads everywhere kind of disaster area. But I wasn't sure I was right about that. I'm not sure if that was for them or really for me that I didn't want to have to look at it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that people have very different set points. And it's interesting because I was looking for research on this and I couldn't really find what I was looking for. Like, has anyone figured out scientifically that, like, let's say clean is 1 and messy is 10, that why are you a 2 and I'm a 9? Like,
Mhm.
there is something very foundational in us that gets us to that place. are people born this way? Like, are they created this way? Like, I couldn't really find a ton of research on it, and I was interested in it. Like, but I think that taking the stress out of our relationship to cleanliness, and Casey Davis often uses the term morally neutral about messiness, that being messy makes you a bad person. And this is definitely a dialogue that's coming up around weight and other things, that like, not only are you that some of the stress is coming from the stigma, right? That somehow being messy or being in a larger body, these things are indicative of some sort of absolute moral failing on your part. And I certainly, growing up as a messy person, internalized that. I mean, I definitely felt myself as somehow lesser than because I was messy. But I've been messy since I was 2, and I'm messy now, decades
And it
and
doesn't
decades
bother
later.
you, right? Like it's and if it's your own space, whatever, right? Like does a messy parent need to try to get it together a little bit for the sake of her kids? Does a overly neat, there can't ever be a drinking glass in the sink parent need to relax a little bit for the sake of her kids? I think yes. I think the
I
answer
think
is yes.
yes. I think yes. Let's listen to Michael Tompkins. He is a psychologist and the co-director of the San Francisco Bay Area Center for Cognitive Therapy. He says very few people actually experience a clutter-free or mess-free life. So certainly, I think also this gets into something that we talk about in every aspect, right? Control. Your ability to control your environment signifies to you on some deep level your need to control and order the chaos that is the universe.
Mhm. Yes.
And I found this Albert Einstein quote that made me laugh because I may have to hang it above my desk. He says, if a cluttered desk is a sign of a cluttered mind, what is an empty desk a sign of? Like he was notoriously, and there was a lot of research that I encountered that the higher on the genius level people got, the messier their desks were. Like
'Cause they didn't have time,
there
right.
does seem to be some correlation between like the quote unquote beautiful mind and messy spaces. And again, it's not something that people have been able to completely quantify, but I mean, it was Albert Einstein, it was Steve Jobs, it was all these people that's like something about a very creative and intelligent mind tends to manifest in mess around yourself.
I mean, my desk is pretty neat because everything's on my computer, but my email inbox is a mess. I have
There
like
you
45,000 unread
go.
emails. So
There
I
you
must have
go.
an uncluttered mind.
So I think that what a lot of the research that I found was getting at is the idea of this quote exactly. To know whether messiness is a harmless part of your lifestyle or a problem that's causing you distress.
Right.
That seems to be the crux of it. And
Right.
I do think, having grown, I mean, I was talking to somebody recently who grew up in a house with a parent who was messy, that was clearly a sign of something going on deeper mentally, that manifested in a lot of hoarding, and that they did not feel comfortable having people come into the house. I mean, I guess
Right.
you could argue, is that a stigma problem that we need to address? That like a hoarding house and a very, very neat Instagram house are of equal value or equal moral weight? I don't know. But certainly I think that the feeling of chaos, that I don't like people to come into my house when it's super messy. It makes me feel shame.
Right. Right. And your kids, I just I keep coming back to like, but it matters if her kids were ashamed to have, and I'm using her, which I'm gendering this, which is I guess part of the problem, right? My kids don't want to have people over because our house is messy. And that's that is a comment on me, and the house is me. And I don't think a male parent would feel the same way.
Let's take a break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about whether we can define the tipping point into where mess becomes a problem.
Okay.
So, Joseph Ferrari, who is a professor of psychology at DePaul University, talks about a tipping point. He
This is
wrote this
perfect.
with
Yeah.
Catherine Roster, a professor at the University of New Mexico. looking at 4 areas where measuring the level of clutter or, quote, overabundance of possessions
Oh, I know what that is.
becomes problematic.
Okay.
Is the clutter causing you distress? And I think for a lot of people, I mean, I have come to realize that my clutter and mess point is never getting anywhere close to 0. If
Mhm.
I'm a 9, it's gonna maybe get to a 6, and then if I have people over, I'm gonna get it to a 2, but it's always coming back to 9. And so, I think that you could answer this question writ large, and you can answer it day to day. So, my level of clutter is kind of a 9 as my personal set point. I've been working on it for decades. The needle has not moved at all. So, I'm not gonna try to change my overall number from a 9 to a 2.
When you're this is a leading question because I have a thought on this. When you are more stressed, does your level of clutter and messiness go when you are more stressed about other things, does your sense of being bothered by the mess around you go up or down? Do you get even more messy or are you like, I got to clean this place up?
It probably stresses me out more when I'm stressed, but it never doesn't stress me out. I mean,
See,
I am extremely messy, but the sight of mess stresses me out.
so I'm just thinking I've gone through a stressful time in my life recently. It doesn't matter what it is, but the point that I'm applying to it is that I have found myself more like, why do we have 75 pens? We don't need 75 pens. I'm throwing out like everybody take the pen they want. And I'm throwing the rest of these out.
Right.
I am more stressed in my life. And so when I look around and I see like all kinds of stuff on the counter that doesn't like, why has this piece of paper been sitting on the counter for a week? It's bothering me more when I'm really stressed about other things.
Yes, and Amy, let me be clear that I am not a medical professional, but in my, medical opinion, that's clearly, right? You're disordered in your bigger life, and you're seeking order
In small
through things you
things.
can
Right.
control,
Let me
right?
throw
I
away the
mean,
extra pens. Right, right.
I am just a chaos monster. Like, when I cook, I have a friend who's a professional chef, and when he cooks, everything goes back in its place as he's doing it. It's incredible to watch. Like,
He
it
does his
look
own mise en place. He puts
oh
it
my
back.
gosh, the organization with which he cooks. I cook, and it looks like 9,000,000 people have had a food fight involving pans in my kitchen. It's just I'm just chaotic in the way that I interact with all of the things, and I think I have put aside any notion that that can be fixed. I think
See,
I have really accepted that, like, that is somehow, for reasons that I may never understand, my fundamental operating system that cannot be fixed.
it might not need to be fixed if it doesn't bother you. Like, it would clearly bother this other person to see the sauce spoon on the counter or getting sauce on the counter instead of on the spoon rest that's right next to the pot. Like, that person needs that to feel relaxed. You need to use 4 pans if you want to feel relaxed. And so therefore, does it matter? It might not as long as, like, then those dishes don't sit there for 3 weeks and
Yeah,
your
I
kids
mean,
can't have anybody over.
I don't know that you can square the circle, because it bothers me, but I can't stop doing it. Like,
Mhm.
both of those truths are true, I think. And so, it does make cleanup much harder. It does make, when I'm full and sitting at the end of a nice meal, like, oh,
Ay, ay, ay. Right,
now
right.
I've gotta go attack the, like, oil splatters that I've
Full
somehow
45
managed to
minutes.
get
Yeah.
on the ceiling. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it stinks, but I think it can't be fixed. So I think, is clutter causing you distress? For me, is yes, and it's going to exist anyway. And so I have to come up with systems to attack it in a way that make an organized sense for me, but I cannot attack the problem that, like, therefore clutter should not exist for me. Never gonna.
And for me, it's like on the sliding scale of more distressed clutter bothers me more. We do have 70 too many pens in our pen drawer, but do I have to deal with it right now? No, but it's bothering me more because like, is chaos is your clutter causing you distress? Sometimes when I'm distressed about other things, it causes me distress. It's a sliding scale to me.
Agree. The next question: is clutter, or mess affecting the livability of your space?
Okay. Like can't sit down because there's stuff all over the couch.
Can't
Laundry's on
sit
the
down because
couch.
there's stuff all over the couch. Can't, like this morning, had a chaos dinner last night. Usually we're pretty good about cleaning up, and we both, my husband and I, have been busy and tired, and we're doing a lot of half cleans. And now 5 half cleans have led to complete chaos in the kitchen. And then I just went in to like make myself a cup of tea, and I'm like, "Ugh, there's just dirty dishes
Yeah, you have to make room in the
everywhere."
sink to
Ugh.
dump out your teacup.
And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, it is now affecting the
Affecting livability.
livability. That's a good marker, I
That
think, for
is.
me to say, okay, this is
Mm.
now, I can't make lunch because it's too dirty in the kitchen. We got to address this.
Yes. And being too neat can affect the livability of your space, I think,
Correct.
right? When you're too rigid about like that couch doesn't look nice when somebody sits on it. So don't
Right.
sit on it.
Right.
Or I have to stop. I can't do anything until I fluff the cushion where you sat.
It's a
Speaking of somebody
super
who has done
good
that.
point that, like, I definitely don't want to live like that either.
Mhm.
I mean, I have friends who have unbelievably immaculate houses, and that's not interesting to me. I don't want to spend that much time cleaning. I do like, I mean, I've had people say to me, and I'm like, that's kind of a secret insult, but I'll take it. They're like, your house is so warm and like it's just so lived in, and I don't feel any stress. I'm like, okay, you're kind of saying I'm messy, but I do think there's something that says like this isn't a house where like everywhere you sit, you're like, what if my butt makes a weird imprint here?
Right.
Like it's definitely homey. It's like the burrow in Harry Potter, like the crazy warm mom who like they live in kind of chaos, but it's very like
Very livable.
warm and welcoming.
Uh-huh.
And you definitely don't have to worry about whether or not your drink is going to leave a mark on the table.
Yeah. So your relationship to clutter should not affect the livability of your space for the people around you in either direction, I think.
That's right. That's right. Because I don't want people to feel like, ew, I don't want to sit down because there's so much cat hair all over
Yeah.
everything. I'm going to
Yeah.
walk away covered in cat hair on the one hand, but also you don't want to feel like, oh, people feel like they can't relax and enjoy themselves in my home because everything looks so perfect that they're going to
Mhm.
make a mess by just existing in my space.
That's right.
Good point. Is clutter taking a toll, or mess taking a toll on your relationships? This is where we get into like, I don't want friends to come over because it's too messy, or possibly we don't want to entertain because we're too worried about people leaving scuff marks on the carpet floor.
Or knowing that we sit, as that Chris Fleming
Knowing
video
that
says.
we sit. We'll
People
link to
can't
that
know
for the
that we
9
sit.
millionth time. But yes, I think that, I'm glad you framed it that way, because I actually think it's really smart and interesting that this is not just for the messy people.
Right.
This is also for, and I think this can also lead to, and the next one is, this, we're still in relationships. I think this can also lead to harm in between our parental and child relationships. If the only thing we see is our children ruining our perfect house by making a mess
Mm.
all the time,
Mhm.
that we're now harming our relationships by our bar of neatness. And
Right.
listen, I'm not pointing fingers because I mean, we bought new couches a year ago, and it's basically like now I hate my children and my cats because all they do is like try to ruin our new couches. But this is something that happens to everybody, and it's true. But I think that it's worth examining, like, is my need, I mean, I think with my own mom, who, believe me, was a saint and I had a great relationship with, we spent too much of my life fighting over the fact that I was messy and she was neat. I mean, I think that we could have probably just gone to our corners earlier on that and had a much more peaceful relationship if we could have gotten to, this can't be fixed and we have to figure out how to live with each other. And that can mean, like, I mean, I say to my kids all the time, don't come into my kitchen and dump an empty, dirty plate in my sink. Nobody's coming behind. I'm not your maid.
Mhm.
I'm not coming behind you to clean this. You're old enough now to show me the respect of washing off your plate and putting it in the dishwasher. Like,
Yeah.
I think it doesn't mean that you give up everything, but I think if messiness is becoming a definition of a relationship between you and another person in your house, it's worth probably looking at.
Right, if you're living with the, like, seething resentment that the laundry's all over the floor, the dirty laundry or the dirty dishes, then you should probably talk about that, right? Rather
Yeah.
than let it take a toll on your relationship.
And now we have, is messiness harming your financial well-being? Again, this can go in either direction, right?
Mhm.
I mean, are you just spending half your paycheck at the Container Store to find one more, like, you know, Pyrex dish that will hold the pie weights or whatever?
Right, right.
I think that the obsessive end of curating a household that looks perfect, and again, if that really works for you and sparks joy, it's okay. I'm Marie Kondoing now, sparking joy, but I mean, but if that's your hobby and you acknowledge it as your hobby and it is something like knitting that brings you joy, is reorganizing the toys with whimsical pictures on the outside that show what's in that particular toy box, and buying brand new, felted crates that will organize everything. If you have the money for it and it really brings you happiness, no harm, no foul.
Right, right.
But does it get
But
to a point where you're it's being driven, is it really just spending a lot of money because you're seeking an illusion of control in a space that maybe you need to just kind of take a couple more deep breaths on?
agreed. I'm trying to think if there's ways that you can be so messy it harms your financial
Oh,
well-being,
for sure.
like being
I
late for
mean,
things, being late for work because you can't find something.
yeah, and messy and disorganized. I mean, I have lost checks,
Ah, yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
jobs. I mean,
Mhm.
really, and you ruin things. I think especially in our current disposable world that you can kind of do the thing of, well, go back to my couches. We just, spent whatever, more than $1,000 on a new couch set, and day 1, I'm decide to sit on it and spill food all over it. Now there's a stain that's always gonna be there. It's just it is can be really costly, and it's it's hard. I mean, I have a child who really struggles with this, and it really frustrates me that we invest in things that they then ruin and break
Mm.
by dint of being messy and careless and disorganized. I mean, you get into words that become much more kind of morally indicting, but it is frustrating to get this kid things and then find them, a month later with a stain in the corner because now it's never coming out. Now that's ruined. It is frustrating. But when I try to navigate that with this child, I often hear my own sense of, wait a minute, this kind of is who I am. And I think that that issue is very hard to parse out because it's not okay to be careless with things and ruin them, but people do have a weirdly different set point about that, and I
Mhm.
think that what you can do, and we'll talk about solutions in a minute, is try to scaffold around, we have a tendency to be late because I can never find my keys. Let's put a hook by the front door, and that's where the keys go. And everybody who doesn't see the keys there should be saying, where are the keys? Let's go find them. We have two sets, we have two strikes on this, and start to build in solutions so that we don't say, like, you're a horrible person because you're late, because why did you lose your keys? You bad person, morally bankrupt human. But you don't just say, "Oh, this is my set point, so I guess everyone has to wait 45 minutes for me to find my keys before they can eat dinner."
Right. Right. It's so it seems like we're coming down to when your amount of messy, either extremely neat or extremely messy, starts to affect people around you that you might need to think about it. But there are times when maybe it doesn't affect the people around you. And in that case, you do you, like my kid with ADHD's room. If there's not food in there, that kid's room can be as messy as that kid would like it to be because their set point is messy and it's fine with them and it shouldn't be I had to learn this, that
Yeah.
your mileage may vary with messy. If it doesn't bother them and it's not affecting me negatively, then why do I care?
Well, yeah, and I think maybe there are some reasons you might care. So let's jump to solutions in part
Okay.
3, Amy. So, lots of studies that link mental health and messy spaces. So, I do think that this has to be parsed out. Again, it's a huge spectrum. There's been a lot of content creators now who are talking about things like their depression room, their doom piles, that there does seem to be that with depression comes fatigue and
Yeah, sort of
and
like
Brad
entropy. Right.
correct, that you're
Uh-huh.
kind of just drifting down the drain.
Yep.
And Brad Schmidt, a distinguished research professor of psychology at Florida State University, says people are oftentimes just so mentally and physically exhausted that they don't feel like they have the energy to take care of themselves or their surroundings. They just don't have the capacity to engage with house cleaning and upkeep as they might have done at some point.
Well, yeah.
And so I do think that mess can be a sign of mental health
It's a
issues.
barometer. Yeah, if it suddenly changes. You're right.
Yes. And so it's worth keeping an eye on. Like, I think an extremely messy room that seems intractable and does seem to be an extension of something going on mentally is worth really looking.
Worth circling. That's right. Right.
So let's talk
I
about some
agree.
solutions to
Okay.
messiness, Amy. I'd never heard of this before. This is what is the didn't know decluttering method from
I don't know. I don't know about the
homesandgardens.com.
didn't know
Didn't you know?
decluttering method.
Coined by famous decluttering duo Joshua Fields Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus, known as the Minimalists, they
Oh,
coined
should
the
have them on the show.
phrase. The didn't know decluttering method definition is if you find something you didn't know you owned and doesn't serve a useful purpose now or won't in the future, you should allow yourself to let it go.
Wow, but this rule is so broad. This just happened to me. I found, again, in my I'm having stress and let me climb up to the upper cabinets we never open and decide that everything in
Yep.
here is a mess and needs to be organized. I found seriously a dozen coolers, like those insulated coolers that you might take to like a football game
Yes.
or, fishing. We have a dozen of them. I live in New York City. We're not
You're not
outdoorsy
out on the
people. We're not,
streams.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're not camping every weekend. We have a dozen insulated coolers. I'm like, we don't need these. Why do we have so many? We have to get rid of these. And then, my spouse was like, well, but if we're like going somewhere and we're bringing food with us, if we're like taking leftovers when we go somewhere, we're bringing dishes, we should keep some. But we might need them. My spouse is particularly prone to that. Like, but I might need that weird piece of wood. And so I end up keeping almost everything for this, but maybe in the future. That
Well,
part we get a little
and
stuck.
there are things in that category that I think are fair, right? Like I have 2 tablecloths that say give thanks and are covered with leaves, and they get I only host Thanksgiving every other year. They get used once every 2 years.
Right.
But that means I just need to find a good place to store them. It's like Christmas decorations, right? Like,
Right.
okay, we're going to use
Get them out of your
sometime.
kitchen. Right.
That is there. I think there's a line between that and like, you don't need a dozen of the coolers,
No,
right?
no.
You maybe need 1. I'll give you 2 if the
Right.
second one fits inside the first one, right?
Yes.
You might someday use. I would argue that 99% probability is the day that you're like, let's go frolic in the stream. You will buy one of those forgetting that you have 12 of them already.
The didn't know decluttering method. Right.
Yes,
Right.
you
exactly.
don't know you have it.
I certainly didn't know I had a dozen. That's right. So maybe I should raffle off a couple of them if anybody wants an insulated cooler.
Yeah. We'll have a What Fresh Hell raffle of those. And I do think that aspirational, this is why the didn't know doesn't have a useful purpose. Again, you're right. Like our ice cream maker. When was the last time we used it, Amy? I'm going to say it was definitely during the pandemic. We were like,
I was going to say
what would be
before
fun?
right.
Making ice cream.
Right. Well, you never know. Hopefully
I would
there won't
say
be another
once
pandemic.
every 5 years, we just get a hankering for homemade ice cream. And we're like, oh, that would be fun. So we keep the ice cream maker and it's in my kitchen 365 days a year for the once. I mean, you can't rent an ice cream maker. And I don't think I want to buy one every 5 years when we want to use it.
Don't forget you have it. Write that down somewhere. Right? Put that on a piece of paper. I have an ice cream maker already.
Yeah. And I do think that but the pasta maker, it's all in the same category. You know, every once in a while we're like, we should make pasta. I'm saying once every 10 years.
Right.
And so I think especially in our current world where my solution to this, and I just had a disagreement with my spouse about this, is my spouse and I now have a safety valve on Amazon ordering. You have to have, like, you know how with the, bombs, you have to have the 2 keys that go in to send it
Yeah.
off? We have a 2-key Amazon ordering system
Mhm.
because we have a cat who likes to drink out of the sink. So then the cat meows at you. Like, I'm sitting here doing the podcast, the cat's meowing. I got to get up, go into the sink, turn it on, let her drink from it, turn it off. So, of course, we look at that and we're like, we should get her a fountain water server, which, of course, we right away Google. It's right there on Amazon. We get it. We
Right.
spend probably $29 on a water fountain for our stupid cat, who, by the way, doesn't like it. Still only
Right,
wants to
right,
drink
right.
out of the sink. But I think in our world, like, everything feels like it's one Amazon purchase away from being solved. And that years having grown up in the infomercial land, it's chops, it slices, it dices. Like, you didn't know you had this problem, but we're going to introduce you to the problem and solve it with the Ronco product. That
Yes.
means you can have your own rotisserie chicken whenever you want because you kind of like rotisserie chicken.
I got my dog from Amazon like a ball that you put kibble in or treats or whatever. That's a little hard to get it out to occupy her when she was alone because she doesn't like being alone. Um,
I've seen it. I don't even have a dog, but I can picture it.
well,
It wraps
it
up in a ribbon,
it
and then they
she
gotta
had
nose it
right,
and
like,
get it.
she wanted nothing to do with it. It
Right.
didn't really work, and it sat there on my kitchen floor judging me for, like, the better part of the last year,
Right.
because for me to pick it up and throw it in the recycling, at least because it's plastic, would be to admit that I shouldn't have bought it in the first place, that I am, in fact, wasting resources, money, and everything else. So I think that that is the hard part for me, like, she has never used this. We will never use it. You should never have bought this,
Mm.
and you're gonna throw it out now, which is accepting all of those
Or you're gonna
things.
hold on to it to
Or you're gonna
prove that
hold
you
on
didn't
to
make
it.
a mistake.
Right, right, right,
Because someday
and
she
not
may
use it.
decide to love it.
Right,
Yes.
right, adding to clutter.
This is the biggest lesson I have learned in the last 20 years. Garbage starts at the front door. It starts it starts with Christmas presents. It starts with Amazon ordering. It starts with all of the crud that comes in your front door. It's garbage the minute it crosses the threshold of your house. And that is the best place to start the decluttering process.
Even if it's nice garbage, like these insulated coolers, half of them have the name on them of some golf outing where my spouse got them, right? Like, got them as a company Christmas present, whatever. Like, they're nice. We have a bunch already. So it is garbage at my front door, even if it's pretty, right? Even if it's like, "Oh, somebody should be able to use this." Yes, but we have this already. So I
Gretchen
love this
Rubin, who
didn't
we've
know.
met in person, always
Yes.
says, "Don't take swag." That's a great
Uh-huh.
way to stop. But it is like you're at an event. It's like, and I get this vase with the name of the company printed on it. You're never going to use that. You're never going to want to use the like Techco vase.
I mean, you never know. My spouse uses a Stanley cup that says Zoo Lily on it every single day at work because we got it somewhere along the way. I'm shocked. I just went to the office. I'm like, "You use that?" "Yes. Yes," because he doesn't
Amy,
like to
I'm
throw
trying to help the
anything
people
away.
out here, and
Yeah, yeah.
you're undercutting me.
But you already have a Stanley cup. You don't need another one, even
You
if it says
and that's
something else on
another
it.
really good rule
Mhm.
because I mean, Dr. Hill myself with my 8 pairs of Target black yoga pants, like and then I go to Target and I'm like, "Oh, these are nice black yoga pants." I'm like, "No, I
These are
own
new.
8 black yoga pants. Stop the madness." Um, so I think that's the biggest thing we can do to stop clutter. Let me throw a couple of other tips at you. Gretchen Rubin, who we were just talking about, she
Mhm.
would say, "Make your bed in the morning." That's her go-to tip. And
I'm
I know Gretchen and I've seen her, and every time I see her, I'm like, "Ugh, I didn't make my bed." Literally, I'll see her face and be like, "My bed's not made."
I'm looking at an unmade bed right now. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm a pretty neat person, but I don't make beds
I have my
once
bed
in a
is
while.
behind my screen right here, and it is not made.
Yeah, yeah.
She says when I've asked people, she wrote a book called The Happiness Project. So simple kind of tips to make you happier. What's made the biggest difference in their happiness? Many people cited the modest make your bed. Making your bed is a step that's quick and easy, yet makes a big difference. Everything looks neater. It's easier to find your shoes. Your bedroom is a more peaceful environment.
I mean, true. All of those things are true.
It's all true. I also make my bed about 3 out of the 7 days of any given week, and I feel better when I do it, and sometimes I don't, and that's also okay. I like this tip, focus on function, not aesthetics. I think that sometimes I get a little into like, look at how nice this will look, and that can be a route into chaos and craziness. That
Right.
does it serve a purpose?
And I have the opposite version of this that I try to resist. Like we have a giant bin of shoes that we keep by the front door. We live in New York City, so like we usually take off our shoes when we come in, and it's just one giant chaotic, pail of shoes. Is it pretty? No. Does it belong on Instagram? No. Does it serve an immediate useful function? Totally. So sometimes I look at that like, oh, I wish I didn't have that messy shoe pail in my front. But I need it. I need it. That the
You're
function
focusing
is
on
worth the
function,
aesthetics.
not aesthetics.
Yes,
That's right.
yes. Yeah.
Because you might get some beautiful looking Pinteresty like thing that says shoes in a nice cursive. But if then people don't put their shoes in the slots, like
In
it's
it,
just
right,
not as
right.
functional.
Right. If it's too hard
And
to use, then it won't get used. That's
I
right.
think that's right, that sometimes we get caught up. And then we've talked about this before. Actually, we'll link to Casey's episode of our podcast, and we'll link to her podcast. This I found so useful. She talks about 5 things.
So useful.
Love
They're
this.
very
Game
useful for the
changer.
overwhelmed, the aforementioned child with the super messy room who needs to clean it and they don't know where to begin. It's the 5 things.
These are the 5 things that are in any room. Number 1, trash. Number 2, dishes. Number 3, laundry. Number 4, things with a place. And number 5, things without a place. And this is just such a great way to attack a big, messy room project. Sometimes if you have children helping you, I find this is great. You're on trash, you're on dishes, you're on laundry, you're on things with a place, you're on things without a place. And sometimes what I do, and I've moved to this system, although I'm not going to say it's flawless, it's got its own problems. I have these big like wax cloth kind of hold all, like almost laundry hamper type bins. And sometimes things without a place just go in there and we deal with them later. So it just means the 5th category doesn't overwhelm you. So like you take all the trash to the trash, you bring all the dishes to the kitchen, you bring all the laundry to the laundry room, you put all the things with a place back in their place, and all the things without a place get dumped in the things without a place.
Bin to leave the room. Right.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. Those things never get dealt with, and then they're missing, and people are like, where the heck is my cleats for, my big game? And you're like, oh, I forgot. They've been in the things without a place bin.
And if you're doing this by yourself,
it's not foolproof.
If you're doing this by yourself or your kid is doing this by themselves, you just do these things in order. Because it's like, I don't know how to clean this room. It's so messy. I don't know where to begin. Okay, let's begin with trash, right? You go in there with the trash bag.
Yes.
Just deal with the trash. That's all this kid has to deal with. This really helps break it down for kids of any stripe. This is the way to clean your room.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so helpful. And we'll link to her article about this so that you can really look at it and break it down. But it's so helpful. Basically, what we're here to say, Amy, is we solved messiness. It's done. But I'm going to say, I'm giving my Hunger Games salute to you messies out there. I see you. I am you. And, you do your best. You kind of go back to one every once in a while and you try your best, but there's nothing wrong with you.
That's right. There's nothing wrong with you. I have a doom pile too. It's just in a very specific designated area of my bedroom.
Place.
It's a very organized doom pile.
And for the hyper organized, I like everything just my way. Why are the people in my space breathing and touching things? People, there's also nothing wrong with you.
Yes, that's right.
It's just how you're made. And we're all going to try to take one step, maybe a little bit towards the middle.
Right.
And realize that like, this is not an indictment of who we are as people. This is something that can be fixed.
Absolutely. You guys, we are so close to 1,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts, which for reasons is a very important milestone for a podcast to meet. Like you're a real podcast if you have at least 1,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts. We didn't make up the rule. It's just the rule. If you haven't left us a rating or a review yet, wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts or otherwise, take a moment right now, throw us some stars, say a couple nice words. It helps listeners find the show, because when a lot of new reviews come in all at once, the algorithms are like, oh, I guess I better show this to more people. So you will be helping the show grow.
We want to be a real podcast, like Pinocchio wanted to be a real
After
boy.
8 years.
Please help us. And with that, everyone, thanks so much for listening. We look forward to talking to you next time.
So long.